Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Thursday, February 1st, and we're also delighted to have with us a veteran team of distinguished journalists, bringing a group we had back in November, I think it was, together again. Shawn Cunningham is a reporter from the Chester Telegraph, and glad to have you down here, Shawn, to tell us about what's going on over the other side of the mountain. And Cherise Madigan is back. She's a freelance journalist based here in Manchester. And again, glad to have you with us. A lot to get to today. Town meeting all of a sudden swinging into view a month or so away. We'll be talking about a few things that'll be popping up on some of the warnings you'll be seeing. But along that line, Shawn, get us started here and tell us what's going on over there in Chester. I gather there's an interesting vote or revote scheduled up in Ludlow. It's got some Act 46 implications.
Sure. Ludlow and Mount Holly were left out of the merger that became Green Mountain Unified. And so they're the last two towns in the Two Rivers Supervisory Union that haven't done anything in terms of Act 46. And they voted just after the show that we did to go ahead and merge and then close Black River High School in 2 years. And what ended up happening was that after 30 days, or a few people filed a petition for a revote. So now it's February 6th, I believe, and they'll be voting again on this, but different rules. It passed in Ludlow 344 to 172. And so what the no vote has to get in order to make that stick is a 2/3 of that 344, or 230 votes. If they win the vote, but only win it by less than 230 votes, then the merger goes through. So it's an interesting situation, and it's been back and forth, and now I guess this is the last ditch.
So is this again another situation where both towns want to keep their local elementary schools open? Is that kind of the...
That actually was part of the Articles of Agreement for the merger, and that's that both towns have to vote to close either elementary school. So they would keep their two elementary schools going, and then they would tuition 7 through 12. And it's looking now, it probably will vote. They'll vote yes, or the no vote won't reach the 230. They only had 172 the first time. So we'll see what happens. But if it doesn't, that's going to throw them into a real maelstrom of state changes.
It's late in the day to be kind of deciding whether or not you're going to keep a merger going or not.
The board that was formed by the vote in November has stopped working because they have to wait for the revote. So there's no budgeting going on. There's no, they're sitting. And until this revote, they can't do anything.
Everything's on hold.
The problem is, if the revote goes through and they start back up again, they only have until July 1st, and that's when they take over the school.
So where would students who are attending Black River now, where would they go?
Well, they could be tuitioned to Green Mountain. If they're in Mount Holly, it's close to go to Mill River. And if they had the transportation, which they'd have to provide themselves, they could go to Burton or any other qualified school. What's happening, though, is a group of people in Ludlow are trying to pull together an independent school, which they would lease the Black River building and sort of restart the Black River Academy, which was a private school years ago. And they're working on that possibility. So
Act 46 goes on and on.
It never stops.
and similar to that, we have kind of a similar situation going on up in Rupert, closer to home here. Folks will recall that back in November, Rupert and Paulet agreed in a vote to form a merger, create the Medowee district, and kind of eventually, I guess, become a side-by-side partner with the Taconic and Green Regional School District around here. That vote, which I'd forgotten how close it was in Rupert, 150 to 142. So only an 8-vote margin passed it in Rupert. So they're going to have a revote on February 15th. Information meeting on February 12th for those of you who may be from Rupert and watching this, that, similar to the situation you're describing there, could kind of throw things into a bit of a twist there at the last minute, because I imagine they too will be hitting the pause button on any kind of planning going forward. Kind of late in the day for that kind of stuff to be happening.
And we'll see what the weather's like.
I guess so, right, yeah. Bad snowstorm could make all the difference. Well, anyway, Cherise, back here in Manchester, we had a forum last week, which you wrote a story about on opiates and the opioid epidemic in Manchester, well, Manchester, Vermont, New England, across the entire country. A really serious problem that some signs, I guess, some faint signals that maybe things are starting to at least stabilize in Vermont. Waiting lists, apparently, according to the Governor's Opioid Council, are getting smaller than they were, and more treatment opportunities are becoming available. But clearly, we're still in the midst of a very deep crisis. So, what was your takeaway from that forum? And I guess also you might want to talk about Representative Sullivan's bill that she's submitting to the legislature.
Yeah, well, the forum was very well moderated. I was glad to have you leading the discussion. But it was really a great conversation because we got so many viewpoints, not just from the panel, but from the audience as well. So on the panel, you have a lot of people running organizations that are working on prevention and education and even recovery in our local communities here in Bennington County. But for the audience, we also heard from an officer with the Vermont Drug Task Force. We heard from State's Attorney Erica Marthage, and quite a few other folks from different perspectives. A gentleman from Valley Vista as well, which is a rehabilitation center. So it was a really comprehensive discussion, and I think what came out of it is that we will really make more progress as we join together as a community in all different aspects. So that's supporting those who are suffering from addiction. We got the firsthand view from Wendy Galbraith, who sadly lost her son 4 months ago. And she was brave enough to share that experience, and also a lot of great resources on how to strengthen prevention. And
yeah, her discussion there, I thought, was one of the most powerful moments of that entire evening, and there were many powerful moments in it, but that had to be an incredibly difficult thing to talk about. I guess the thing when I think about this whole situation, the thing that keeps coming back to me is, what was the pharmaceutical and medical community thinking about when, back in the 1990s or whenever, opioids began to be pushed by the pharmaceutical industry, as far as I can tell, as a pain management tool, and that pain management sort of was such a big deal that the whole potential for long-term addiction or a huge spike in addiction, like we've now since seen, was sort of shrugged off.
Yeah, and I think a nurse from SVMC stood up in the audience and spoke to that as well, saying that in the 90s, pain was made a sixth vital sign for them. So the doctors were responsible for addressing their patients' pain in a way that they hadn't been before. So couple that with pharmaceutical industries marketing these drugs in a way that they thought was responsible at the time, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Now they've probably realized that that's not the most responsible method. And organizations like SVMC, from what we heard on Thursday, are working to change that, but there's no federal regulations forcing them to do so. They're doing so as an organization by their own volition. And that kind of takes us to Representative Sullivan's bill, which is aiming to strengthen the kind of legal recourse or the legal avenues that people can take if they feel that a doctor or a pharmaceutical company or any other healthcare entity has acted irresponsible. I think she terms it prescription malpractice. It'll give them strengthened opportunities through a Vermont statute to pursue legal action for any damages.
So do we have any sense as to what the likelihood that this bill will become law this year? I mean, I haven't had a chance to talk to her since we got that bill, but is it going to be kind of a high priority, does she feel?
Well, I'm sure it's a high priority for Representative Sullivan. She first announced it back in August when Fed Up held a rally here in Manchester about the opiate crisis, led by Wendy Galbraith. She mentioned it then. She's been building up a lot of steam here locally, and when she introduced it last week, I think there were 20 other representatives standing beside her in support of her. That being said, she's openly acknowledged that she'll get a lot of pushback from the medical community because this will make it easier for people to sue, and that's the last thing that a lot of doctors would want, probably. So we'll see.
Just
where that
wondering,
goes.
Shawn, as we're talking about this, I mean, is there the same kind of angst about this whole issue up in Chester and that
It's
way?
everywhere. You know, it's a constant thing. And if you just turn on a police radio and listen to the fire departments going out to, you know, take care of someone who's overdosed, it's an incredible thing.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation for anyone to be caught up in that. It sounds terrible. And some of the statistics I ran across in the course of preparing for that really were stunning. I mean, apparently more than half of the 266 young children who are in state custody today are there due to opioid abuse issues. Either, I'm assuming, their parents are struggling with addiction issues, or they were born, you know, opioid dependent. Neonatal syndrome, I think is the technical term for it, and the death toll. I guess it's hardly good news, but you know, just to kind of put things in perspective, Vermont nationally is somewhere in the middle of the pack in terms of overdose deaths. West Virginia being first, but interestingly, New Hampshire tied for second with Ohio, and apparently they're getting a lot of that coming up through Massachusetts, Lowell and Springfield, Massachusetts. But the overdose deaths in Vermont are the lowest of the 6 states in the New England area. That's scant comfort for anyone who's, you know, one of those people. But I suppose we can say, well, at least maybe things are showing some small signs of improvement. I guess I was just thinking before we leave Manchester, Cherise, there's been some other interesting things going on locally here. In connection with town meeting, we have the Manchester Business Association successfully petitioned for their $50,000 in support. I guess they're looking to have that continue over the next 3 years to support their marketing initiatives. That's going to be, I think, an interesting talking point at town meeting. I'm sure there'll be folks that will have opinions to share and weigh in on both sides of that question. Very interesting one. But the other thing that's been going on that's been kind of interesting to follow is the Manchester Planning Commission's work on their zoning regulations and overhaul. It sounds like a fairly wide-ranging project that they've been on to make a few changes in the downtown core as well as the outlying rural areas. Tell us a little bit about that. What's been going on?
Yeah, so right now they've just concluded two separate 2-hour public hearings on the issue, one on the town core and one on the rural regions of Manchester. And at this point, they'll have one more working session, I think, next Monday. And after that, it'll be brought to the select board. But of course, they want to be sure that it's solid before it goes to the select board, because once it's in their hands, every new proposal that comes into the zoning administrator would have to pass both the old and the new zoning ordinances. So that would be kind of a pain for everyone involved the longer that lasts.
Yes, it would.
Yeah. Ultimately, what they're trying to do is plan out Manchester's future in a sense and increase the density in the town center so that you're able to have more residences here, hopefully more workforce housing for people that don't qualify for subsidized housing, but also don't make the average of $50,000 for Bennington County, and at the same time preserve the kind of rural character that makes Vermont and Manchester feel like the place it's always been.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to see if, assuming these new regulations come into being, which it sounds like they're likely to do.
What happens if one says yes and the other says no?
What the select board says yes?
If you have 2 reviews.
Yeah, I'm not
Oh,
sure.
right.
I think it would have to fail then.
Wow.
Janet Hurley said that they would have to pass both for the time being until the select board chooses to adopt the new ordinance or reject it.
Chester's doing something not similar, but in the same way. They're bringing in a planner to do a zoning audit and identify the things that are problematic, and especially things that are problematic in light of the town plan. So as the town plan is being redone, they're doing an audit as well and trying to mesh the 2 of those together, which seems like a good good way to go.
And here, I think it grew out of the same way. We had a new town plan, I think, signed in 2017, and then an economic development study that led them towards revamping zoning.
One thing that's going to be really interesting to see is should these new regulations come into being and new zoning districts created and all of that, if there actually is a lot of new like housing development or people moving into downtown, because it seems to me like the problem right now is the cost.
Yeah.
That if you wanted to live downtown, it's expensive, and if you're one of those sort of regular working folks who, lives in the area, I mean, I guess that's the idea, is to try and bring more people back into town. If you're not taking or inheriting a home that your parents had or something like that, you're looking at spending a fair amount of money, either to rent or to buy, if we're talking about the downtown core. So I don't, it's going to be interesting to see in 3 or 4 or 5 years, after everything kind of has a chance to percolate a bit, whether or not that really does stimulate new building or what.
Yeah, and I think commissioners themselves have said that whatever framework they lay, this will still be dependent on the market forces and what comes into town and what doesn't. And there will always be taxes here that are higher than in some other places. So
we shall see. Well, anyway, on another note, Shawn, you were telling us about another bill up in Montpelier about public notices in being permissible or allowed on online papers. And this is a story I confess I had not been following closely, but it sounded fascinating when you were telling me about it. So, what's the skinny here?
Well, there are over. First of all, courts, municipalities, various organizations have to put legal notices into newspapers, and of course also into newspapers of record. And in the state statutes, there's no definition of what a newspaper is. We consider ourselves an online newspaper. We do everything that a newspaper does except print. And so we've been asking why we can't be a paper of record or take legal notices. And we've been told by the Secretary of State's office it's not a problem. Someone could do that. A municipality could do that. But their municipal lawyers will say, it's not a safe thing to do. It's something that's uncharted, so don't do it because it could get you into trouble. What this bill, Senate 97, did was say, basically papers that are digital only could be used as venues for public notices. And the newspaper industry is not happy.
Up in arms, huh?
And I don't think that, it doesn't look as though that bill is going to go anywhere this year. We talked about it last year, it's been talked about again this year, but what we are looking at is the idea that a larger and larger number of people get their news online. They get their news digitally. And so what's happening is that those people are, in a sense, because they're not going to a newspaper, are being left out of a large portion of our civic life. And so, for example, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns supported the bill because they were looking at the idea of trying to bring younger, newer blood into the civic process. And you're not going to do that if people don't really know what's going on, and they're not finding that unless they're going to a paper.
So what's the situation now in Chester then? As a resident of Chester would go to which paper then to get, or would the select
paper of
board
record
go?
is The Message, which is a free weekly. It gets put in everyone's mailbox. But when you go to there's also the Vermont Journal, but when you go to the post office, the recycling bin is filled with those two papers. And at the same time, we were up 43.6% over last year in page views. So a lot of people are coming to a digital newspaper, but we're not able to be the paper of record.
And what's the argument then that the traditional print papers are making to say that you can't do this? Is it just an economic one? Or?
That it's physical, that it can't be tampered with, that it can't be, in a sense, lost because a website might go away, Those sorts of arguments are being made, but there are ways around that. There are ways to handle that. And right now, the traditional dead tree papers are now proposing, studying is what they're saying, the idea of having a place to put all of these online so people could go and page through and find the ones for their town as an archive. But
that's an interesting question, because I guess I find it amazing that there would even be any kind of, and speaking as someone who spent a long time in dead tree journalism, and still really enjoy reading a regular old newspaper rather than doing that. But I guess I find it amazing that there would really be much of an issue, because, as you said, the future is clearly knocking at the door.
try to find someone under 30 who sits down to a newspaper.
Yeah. I know none of my kids do. I'm not even sure they know what one is. But anyway, that leads us into kind of another related thing. Just to kind of before we go, this whole announcement that Facebook is tweaking, I guess is perhaps the word, its news feed. Now, what is going on with that, Cherise? You're our expert here on this one, I think.
Sounds good. Yeah, it really ties into the conversation that Shawn just started as well, in that things like legal notices and things like that are a really important source of revenue and readership for a lot of physical papers. And in an industry like this one, revenue really makes a big difference no matter where it comes from. On top of that, there's the burden that there's likely going to be a print tariff on the actual paper that dead tree papers are printed on soon, making that paper a lot more expensive. So kind of going on top of that are these new regulations from Facebook that are designed around a good goal, having more things in your newsfeed from your family, friends, people that you know in real life. But what happens is that they'll be downgrading news outlets and publications in people's news feeds. And I don't think it's entirely clear how they'll be doing that yet. I know in a lot of countries they did test runs where they sorted all news and all professional publications into a separate feed entirely. And what happened in those countries is a lot of big publications saw their readership drop sometimes by more than half. So, of course, a lot of publications in the US are very worried that even if it's not sorted into a separate newsfeed, if it's down lower in people's newsfeed, how is that going to impact their readership? Who's going to be seeing their articles and engaging with them? So you'll see from a lot of publications, from the New York Times to, I'm sure, the Chester Telegraph and everybody, this is how you're going to keep seeing us, prioritize us, like us, engage with us, because otherwise it might become more difficult.
Is this some sort of reaction, do you think, to the whole uproar about the 2016 election and
I think so.
meddling by foreign countries and playing games with Facebook trolls and stuff like that?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand with the larger crackdown on actual fake news and Facebook pages posting inaccurate facts. So that, coupled with the kind of downgrading in the newsfeed of trusted and reliable publications, is probably something that the consumers do want to see from Facebook, and they're catering to that as a business would. So it's a kind of dynamic opposition as I see it.
Mm-hmm.
So does this mean then that rather than, say, getting something from the Times or some other publication you tend to read, your feed will now be all about your friends doing something or another and going on vacation or
quite
whatever?
A bit more.
Okay.
It's not definite how that's going to work specifically yet. But.
So that's bad news for people like us, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
And there are ways to work it so that you can continue to get your folks. They just have to know that there are things they need to do. And each newspaper is putting out some guide to say, this is how to do this. This is how to keep our news coming to you, because obviously you're already getting it and you value it.
Just when I think I finally figured social media out, it changes. This happens all the time. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Shawn, there's one interesting little tidbit from Weston that we were talking about before we went on the air that I just thought, we could just throw in there before we go. These are the sort of things that never cease to say, wow, how Vermont is this? But this bit about voter appropriations needing to be from Weston, they want to. What's the purpose of that?
The chairman of the select board in Weston, a few nights back, proposed that they put an article in the warning that would say that only charities, service agency, that sort of thing, from Weston would be able to petition for money to be voted on at town meeting. So these voted articles, visiting nurse, that sort of thing, those organizations, including this one, wouldn't qualify for a stipend because they wouldn't be able to petition. And our reporter for Weston, Bruce Frauman, reported on this, and we called the Secretary of State's office and spoke with the person in charge of elections, and he said no, that if in fact there was a petition that someone circulated and enough registered voters signed it, that there's no way that you can stop that from being on the articles.
So was there motivation that they were just getting so many more petitions from out of town and driving up the cost of their budget?
That's the odd thing, is that most of the money in this was in town, and the amount that these other outside organizations were asking for actually has been dropping over the past couple of years. So it's an odd way of looking at it, but that's select boards.
Because I think, thinking back, I mean, a lot of warnings have, requests from folks, they're countywide organizations. Mm-hmm. They serve many towns in the area. I'm thinking nursing associations and all kinds of, charitable organizations.
Meals on Wheels.
They serve multiple towns. They have to.
Sure.
So why would we just want to be totally centric to one town? Oh well, we'll have to keep tabs on that one, I guess. Well, thank you both for being here and sharing your insights and observations about what's been going on around the area the past month or so, and we'll have you both back again soon, I am quite sure. And thank you as well for sharing your time with us today. This has been the Press Pass on GNAT TV. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.